Welcome to News Point on Memories TV. My name is Ofonisa Basi. Now, still on taxation, the federal government has been looking for means to increase internally generated revenue to fund demands of development. In a bid to do so, government has proposed imposition of fresh taxes on Nigerians to fund infrastructural development. By introduction of toll gates on federal highways across the nation. There is also proposition on the increment of VAT from 5% to 7.5%. And then came the communication service tax, CST, to replace the value-added tax. Now, putting all this together, it is obvious that this has resulted in multiple taxation. Does this policy sit well with the citizen? What is the brain behind this? Is Mr. President not aware of the poor economic status of most Nigerians? This and many more will be discussed as we speak with the Vice Chairperson and Acting Secretary of the Nigerian Labour Congress Akwa Ibom State Council, Conrad Iboro Ibara. Good to have you, sir.
Thank you, Ofon.
All right, sir. What is your take on federal government multi-taxing the citizens?
Well, taxation has been there with us all through the ages. In the Bible, you discover that citizens were being taxed. So actually, tax is not a new thing. It is one of the ways of raising revenue for the purposes of administration of the state. But I think what is of issue here is the planned increases in the known taxes. We have proposals to increase the value-added tax, which was previously at 5% to 7.5%. That is about 50% increase. And then we have proposed and coming up in the next fiscal year, the toll gates, which are going to be introduced in federal highways to fund infrastructure, as the government has said. We also have a new one, which is called the communication service tax, which is at the rate of 9% and cuts across all communication services, voice calls, SMS, internet, services like voice over internet, data services, and all of that. Now, this is the issue, and it is an issue because, like you said, Nigeria was recently declared as the poverty capital of the world. And we do know that the ordinary citizens bear the burden of these taxes. Taxes actually reduce the spending power of citizens. It reduces the income of citizens because it is from their income that taxes are paid. In the case of the value-added tax, which is an indirect tax in the sense that it is not taxed directly on the income, but it is taxed on consumption. So every time you buy a commodity, the value-added tax is built into the price of the commodity. So ultimately, it trickles down to the spending power of the ordinary man. So that is why it is an issue, because it will increase poverty. It will increase poverty. So you said, what is my take? My take is this is a topical issue. It is an issue that needs to be reconsidered by the government. If the government is sincere about its poverty alleviating policies, then there is every reason to question the sincerity and the sincerity of the government in respect of the increases in the tax rate. And we also have to consider the timing of the imposition and increments that are being made to these classes of taxes. It has been argued that the increases in the value-added tax will help the government to fund the new minimum wage. But the question there is, you impose taxes which will ultimately translate to higher prices. So wouldn't it wipe away the benefits from the proposed new minimum wage? So often, these are the issues in contention.
Okay, is it right for the government to come up with this policy when, as of last year, Nigeria was taxed the poverty capital of the world?
If you ask me, it is not about right in the sense of morality. Okay, we have to question government's economic policy itself. in 2017, the government came up with a new tax policy. And one of the objectives of the new tax policy was to reduce the burden of taxation on the very poor, okay? Now, this new policy contradicts that 2017 tax policy of the government. So we are seeing policy reversals here, okay? We are seeing a situation where the government appears to be confused. In one breath, the government says it wants to reduce poverty and it wants to bring up a tax regime that reduces the burden of taxation on the poor citizens. The same government also comes up with increases in tax rates. It shows a government that perhaps could be confused with respect to economic policy making. So I think there is every need for the government to go back to the drawing board and look at these things holistically and answer some critical questions. Yes, the government is constrained with respect to revenue generation because all over the world the price of oil is crashing and the demand for oil is nosediving. So being a country that is almost totally dependent on oil revenue, it poses a challenge for the government to sustain its revenue at previous levels. But I think the government can be creative. You know, if we have a challenge with dwindling revenue from oil, you don't just jump to increasing taxes. The government can be more creative in seeking out other ways of generating revenue.
All right, sir. Is there any moral justification for toll plazas, judging from the dilapidated state of our federal roads?
Morally, no. But like I said, the issues of governance are not normative, so the moral argument is not the one we consider in the first instance. We consider if the policy and its implementation processes are realistic, are they attainable, okay? Now, in the past, we had the toll gates. Sometime in the past, we also had the dismantling of the toll gates. And the same arguments that are being used now were used by government as at that time to fund infrastructure development. We even had a situation where the government has adopted the build, operate and transfer policy, you know, as a partnership between the government and the private sector investors to build certain roads across the country. And it did not work. It did not work. Now, like I said, we have to go back to the drawing board and we have to do some creative thinking. Why do the roads get so spoiled? Yes, government has no maintenance culture for public infrastructure. We know that already. I agree with that. But then, why should we use roads for the bulk of the haulage of goods and commodities? Okay. In every other country where government is a little bit more proactive and reasonable, I'm sorry to use that word, you discover that bulk haulage is conducted with the railways. Okay. In the Nigeria scenario, the rail system has almost completely collapsed. So if you build a road that is supposed to have a lifespan of 25 to 30 years, but you end up piling truckloads of cement on those roads will become damaged in a space of 10 to 15 years. Okay, so it's like a cloak and bucket mentality where the government continues to do things the wrong way instead of being creative to do things the right way. If we had the rail system that cuts across the country, we wouldn't have so much pressure on our roads. Our roads will endure for longer periods than they do presently. And we will have a cheaper means of moving goods. And this will translate to lower prices of commodities for the citizens. And this ultimately will bring down the inflation rate. And we would have been able to measure up with our colleagues across the world and even within Africa in terms of governance, in terms of economic development. So I think government needs to be creative. Government needs to bring more experience on board. We have ministers and appointees of government everywhere that are appointed on the basis of nepotism and other considerations instead of being appointed on merit and consideration for the capacity of those individuals. So I am saying that the government needs to bring experience on board, needs to bring capacity on board, needs to be more creative in the formulation and implementation of its economic policies. Otherwise, we'll continue to get it wrong. The toll gates will not solve our problems. That's the summary.
Okay, well, it seems the government of the day is aimed at squeezing out money from the citizens at all costs. Relating this to the communication service tax, now, is there no other way that government can generate revenue?
I think generating revenue may not be the issue here, but the utilization of the revenue. Is it really true that the federal government does not have enough for its needs? Is it really true that the state government does not have enough for its needs? Now, there are certain high-profile expenditures that do not add value to the citizenry. For instance, you look at the budget of the National Assembly, which has been attracting a lot of attention in recent times, and people have asked questions: why do the legislators need to replace their cars, every 2 years, or I don't know how many years? Why do they have to earn such high levels of salaries and other emoluments? Now, there are lots of leakages that need to be plugged to enable government to better utilize the revenue that it currently receives. That's one. Two, at the current VAT level of 5%, a lot of scholars have argued that the government can double the revenue from VAT if it is creative in expanding the tax net. By the tax net, I mean the total number of people that pay a particular tax. Okay, you would understand that we have problems with data all over the country. As a matter of fact, the president, while inaugurating the new economic management team just last week, set a task for the economic team, a task of acquiring more credible data for a more robust economic policy making. So we do not even have sufficient data on the category of persons and institutions and organizations, companies and firms that are qualified for different categories of tax. We do not have enough information on those that evade tax. We do not have enough information on anything. My argument is, at the current rate of 5% for VAT, because that is the current, the new one will take effect from 2020, the government could actually increase the revenue from tax if it brings more people into the tax net. If you take a walk around town, you discover a lot of shops, very big shops for that matter, and most of these shops pay taxes, different categories of taxes. But the question is, how credible are the volumes of taxes that are paid by these businesses? Who does the monitoring? Who ensures that taxes are not being evaded? You move to the oil sector of Akwa Ibom State, for instance, where you have more than 200 oil servicing firms in operation, onshore and offshore around Ibuna and its environs, and you begin to ask yourself, are we really sure that all of them are paying the right amount of taxes that they are supposed to pay? You see, we have a problem in Nigeria with getting these figures. Until recently, there were all problems with knowing the exact quantity of crude oil that is being produced, in Nigeria. Same with every other thing. We work with population estimates. We cannot say for sure what the actual population of Nigeria is. We work with estimates, for most of the economic variables. So I am saying that if the government does its work well, it wouldn't need to increase the rate of tax. All it would need to do would be to bring more taxpayers within the tax net. That's my submission.
All right, sir. Thank you so much. But before we leave, what do you think is the way forward?
The government needs to be responsive and responsible. We need transparency and accountability in a lot of respects. We need focus. Recently, you must have heard in the news, the government voted 200 billion naira for what it calls a national livestock empowerment scheme, which is, to me, a replacement for the other one that generated so much controversy, talking about the Ruga. And you begin to ask yourself, what is this obsession with cows? Okay, what is this obsession with this particular sector? 200 billion naira into the railways would have given us a few more kilometers of railways across the country. And these are the kind of things that the government needs to do: redirect its energy towards things that will create more value, redirect the expenditure on a whole lot of things like the 9 billion naira that is being proposed for the maintenance of the presidential air fleet. If you look at the budget, proposed budget for 2020, you see a whole lot of subheads. The other day somebody said the expenditure on the clinic at the presidential villa is uncalled for, because we also heard in the past the wife of the president saying that that clinic is non-functional. But going forward, you discover that year in, year out, billions of naira are voted for this very clinic, and whenever the president is ill, he has to be flown abroad for treatment. So we wonder what happens to all the money that gets voted for the clinic. So these are the kind of things the government has to look at. Its what I call earlier high-profile expenditure. Some time ago, there was a whole lot of expenditure on getting Nigerian Airways back on its wings, and it did not work. So that was so much money down the drain. So the government has to curtail those kinds of expenditure that do not bring value. If it does so, then it will discover that it has more money, in its kitty to implement most of its project and undertake the administration of the country, rather than imposing new taxes and increasing the tax rates of existing taxes. So basically, I think we need to be more creative. We need to be more responsive. The government needs to be more responsive to the needs of the citizens. All along, I see us doing what I call trial and error, and it is not the best in the modern era. This is 2019, and Rwanda, the other day we had the miracle where Rwanda pushed out its first set of smartphones. Around the world, across Africa, a lot of governments are attending a lot of things. In Nigeria, we are trailing behind in terms of deepening of ICT, in terms of financial inclusion, in terms of literacy rate, in terms of life expectancy. So at this moment, every right-thinking Nigeria is asking the government to be more responsive to the needs of the citizens, and in attempting to resolve the challenges that confront governance, to bring more capable hands on board. Every time the government appoints ministers, we rush to the media to see the kinds of people that are appointed, and we discover that there is no Professor Emegwali there. There is no all the big known names of Nigerians across the world that are doing miracles and have done so well. They are not brought on board to manage the economy. Rather, you see people being brought for political reasons, for nepotic reasons, and these are the kind of things that need to change for us to be able to move this country forward.
All right, thank you so much, Comrade Ibarra. It was very, very nice speaking with you. Now, that's how far we can go on News Point today on Memories TV. Please, for more updates, don't forget to log on to our website, www.memoriestv.com.ng. You can also like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, YouTube at Memories TV. I remain Ofoniseba Sibasi. Have a very blessed day.